Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Paddock Pass podcast. Good news, it's quite easy to pronounce Malaysia and Sepang, although I'm probably still wrong with that one. But we're going to chew over the 20th round of 2025 MotoGP. As people watching on YouTube might be able to see, I'm still in the media centre. My name's Adam Wheeler, and somewhere over my right shoulder is the esteemed Neil Morrison. How are you, Neil?
Delirious, I would say, at this stage of the flyaways, but still here and still compos mentis. So yeah, decent.
Oh, I can see again on the video, the light above your head is giving you a very kind of angelic halo, which is as far from the real representation as possible for your characters. So good work.
Yeah, they need to put like a little red filter over the top of it and yeah, give me some horns.
Well, yeah, you having the horn isn't ever really a problem on a GP basis, is it? Dave, how are you doing over there in the Netherlands? Are you well?
Well, they moved the clocks, and so I'm jet lagged. I don't know what time it is or anything. I managed to get jet lagged just going to the UK, which is only an hour's different. So, yeah.
Well, listen, to try invigorate you, give us your moment from this Grand Prix. What stood out from these couple of days here in very steamy Malaysia?
My moment from the Grand Prix was the first lap of the sprint race. Was Pecco Bagnaia. I was watching the onboard from Alex Marquez's bike, and going into turn 4, you can actually see that Pecco nearly loses the front going in there, and it was sort of. It was indicative of his whole weekend, really, that he was pushing really hard, that he didn't quite have the bike that he needed, that he still managed to be fast, and that he really, really wanted something. So, yeah, it was. We will talk about Pecco later, but it was one of those moments that you think, yeah, there's so much going on here.
I would like to chime in with my moment, and I think it has to be watching Joan Mir ride the Honda RCV in a way that we haven't quite seen in the last couple of years, since his tenure with HRC began. And I think just as much as the results, because this was Mir's second podium appearance of the season and second in the last 4 GPs, it was really like a measure of how far HRC have come, that he was able to manipulate the bike in that way. So that stands out for me. Neil, what about you?
My moment was when it became clear that Pecco Bagnaia retired from today's race due to a puncture. It looked as though there may have been some mechanical issue at first. He was looking over his shoulder, looking down at his bike. It wasn't immediately clear. Then I think we saw some replays of his rear tire being deformed. And we were told afterwards by Michelin that there was a puncture in the middle of the tire, which suggests that it came from a piercing from some errant carbon fiber that was on the track somewhere. And someone from Michelin said that the amount of times this has happened in the MotoGP, the recent MotoGP era since 2016, a puncture can be counted on one hand, and it's just very, very indicative of Pecco's 2025 that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. It seems for him.
Yeah, speaking of things that can go wrong, also carbon fiber debris. I mean, there was quite a hefty moment even before the Grand Prix races began here. What was probably the hottest conditions and the busiest we've seen Sepang, Neil, since we've been here. The collision on the sighting lap between the world champion Jose Antonio Rueda and Noah Dettwiler, horrendous footage. Very difficult to watch again. It seems almost inexplicable, even though we have seen these kind of accidents before where riders are just going at different speeds at different moments on the racetrack. And Dave, what was kind of your take on watching it? And, do we have a latest update on Dettwiler? Because we've been informed that Jose Antonio Rueda has a concussion. He has a fractured I'm not sure of his left hand, but I'm sure by the time people are listening to this podcast, there might be a bit more information. So we don't want to dwell on it too much. But the fact that it happened at all was almost inexplicable.
Yeah, I mean, I've only seen the replay. I wasn't actually awake for it to watch it live, but it was. It's one of those things that happens on the warm-up lap because you've got such difference in speeds. Dettwiler was going very slowly on the racing line. Rueda was going very fast. Rueda, should have seen him but didn't. Slammed into the back of him, and because of the speed differential, it was horrendous. Nothing much to say. It's one of those days when you are not really enjoying being a motorcycle racing journalist because these things can happen. You absolutely hate it when it does. There's no updates that I know of Noah Dettwiler other than that he is still critically ill in hospital as we speak. Certainly sending, I think, for all of us, sending our thoughts and prayers to his family and to him, and hoping that he pulls through.
Yeah, wonderfully put, Dave. Neil, what was your impression? Being here at the circuit, there was this sort of sense of deja vu for some of the serious accidents we've seen in the past. The race was delayed by a couple of hours. It was shortened to 10 laps. We had to wait until the riders were airlifted away from the circuit and then for the medical helicopter to return. So that explained the delay and the reason why Moto2 was then put towards the end of the race schedule.
Yeah, just horrible, really. It put like a real cloud over the rest of the day, the rest of the Grand Prix. Horrible incident, as Dave said, and so many just when there's a kind of vacuum of information fills up with all kinds of speculation. And after the Moto3 race, I was down in the paddock speaking to some riders, and almost garage to garage, I was hearing different reports of the kind of extent of the seriousness of the injuries. It's great that Jose Antonio Rueda has relatively minimum injuries considering what happened. But yeah, we are led to believe that it's a pretty serious situation for Noah Dettwiler. And he's just such a sweet young lad, Swiss rider, who was friends with just de Pasquier, who obviously had a terrible, unfortunate end in 2021. This was Noah's second season and it hasn't quite gone to plan. And I think he may have had a mechanical issue. His teammate Scott Ogden told me that he saw Noah with his hand raised just before the incident happened, which indicates that maybe there was a problem with his bike. As Dave said, we have to hope that he pulls through. It just puts it all into perspective, really. It was difficult to really build up much enthusiasm for the racing afterwards when this was kind of hanging over us. And I think some of the MotoGP riders felt the same.
Yeah, friend and colleague Jack Appleyard on the World Feed, I think, was talking to Riccardo Rossi, who said that he'd seen the Wheeler's bike having a bit of a mechanical issue. That would certainly help find some cause to the accident. And again, Dave, I don't think we can attribute blame really here. It's just like one of those horrendous accidents, like you say, can happen. When riders are just doing different speeds to get around the track, to form up on the grid for ahead of the warm-up lap.
Yeah, no, there are. The warm-up lap is surprisingly dangerous because of the potential for speed. Whenever there is a speed differential, that's when there is dangerous. I think there were a few riders. I think Pecco was sort of basically saying he wasn't sure that the Moto3 race should have gone ahead. I think it was, it must have been really tough on them. There was a couple of riders, as Neil said, who were quite distracted by everything. I think perhaps it might have been better to cancel the Moto3 race and get on with the Moto2 race because there's a little bit of distance, and also there's nothing to fight for. In Moto3 the championship is already settled, so scrapping a race would have left it. But sometimes it becomes extremely difficult to manage all of the critical care that is needed at the time in the case of very, very serious accidents. So it's just a miserable experience all around.
Just a final point on this, I think it was handled quite well, right, Neil, compared to perhaps, Jason's accident in Mugello, where, we had the, I would say, inappropriate kind of grid ceremony before the MotoGP race. Of course, in these situations, timing is everything, and you can only relay what you know when you know it. And it was perhaps a good thing that most of the paddock didn't really get any kind of confirmation of what was going on until, it was obvious that the clock was ticking and some sort of race action had to happen.
Yeah, I think the lack of an official update on Dettwiler up until now sort of stems from Dorna's protocol, in which they want to completely understand what's going on with the situation before they issue an update. And also, there is the fact that his family are currently, I think, in transit out to Malaysia. They weren't here this weekend. His mum and dad, I think, are currently traveling out. So all these things have to be considered before they can relate exactly what his condition is. Maybe the condition was changing from the moment it happened until now. So, we just don't really know. But yeah, definitely compared to, for example, de Pasquier's crash, when we had a camera shot, pretty much just a static camera shot looking over the marshals working on poor Jason de Pasquier for 40 or 50 minutes after it happened, before he was moved into a helicopter. We had, at least we didn't have that kind of on the live shots today. There's not really much more to say, just, fingers crossed that he pulls through.
It's always really difficult because as a journalist, you have a duty to report what happens. But the dilemma is that you don't want to actually spread misinformation, because there's always, when these things happen, there's always lots of rumor, lots of people saying things. Some people, know. Some people know a little bit. Some people think they know. And I think in these cases it's better, precisely because the family are sitting at home, they're not there. It's better to wait for official confirmation via medical, the doctors know, we don't. So sometimes I think it's better to shut up and wait.
Yeah. Thoughts with the teams and with the families, and an unfortunate way, of course, to open the Grand Prix here today. In the end, it finished well for one particular rider, Alex Marquez. I think that's his 11th podium of the season, his third victory. And, to adopt a cliche, you wait 5 years for a win and then 3 come along at once. So Marquez just doing a fantastic performance today, starting strongly. And once Pecco Bagnaia had trouble, I think he said it was after 12 laps, he started to feel the effects of that puncture. Then the race was pretty much beyond dispute, even though this wasn't a very clean Grand Prix for Alex Marquez. He said he didn't feel great in the sprint. Obviously had problems on Friday when it was complicated between the changeable and dry, wet weather conditions. But Neil, this was, he confirmed P2 in the championship, and I thought you asked him a great question in the official press conference by saying, how much do you value being second in MotoGP compared to your title wins in Moto3 and Moto2? And he said it's on a par.
Yeah, I think the final result wasn't surprising coming into the weekend, but maybe if you had witnessed how the weekend had played out in real time, it was something of a surprise. As you said, he had 2 crashes on the Friday. Tricky day for everyone with the rain. The grip was really, really low here. So much lap times were so much slower than what we have at, for example, the Sepang test. And Alex didn't really seem to know what was going on. He admitted during the sprint that he was riding very nervously, quite wooden on the bike. It was almost like what Mark had been saying during the Motegi race weekend, when he knew that achievement was so tantalizingly close, and it was just all about not making a mistake. And certainly on Sunday, he could just ride a bit freer. You could see that immediately. Acosta got ahead of him right into the start, and you thought, there's a bit of a roadblock, but he was so aggressive on Acosta, and then nicely aggressive on Bagnaia as well to take the lead. And it was a really, really strong performance. You felt that he was just managing it up front, and it was a really nice way to kind of toast what has been a brilliant season, and second in the championship, which he confirmed on the Saturday. Really, really, really fine stuff from Alex.
As ever on our review shows, we like to ask our Patreon subscribers if they've got any questions, and we provide extra content throughout the Grand Prix weekend on the Patreon channel. So go to patreon.com/paddockpasspodcast and you'll find some great content then. In particular, we recorded a Sepang 2015 show with Neil and Matt Burt, who are actually on the ground that day for the Malaysian Grand Prix, and like a momentous part of modern MotoGP history. So head over to our Patreon account to listen to that show. Some great stuff in there. But anyway, Dave, to you, we had a question from listener Alex Ragsdale, who says, is Alex Marquez the second best talent in MotoGP currently?
No, but he is very, very good. Fabio Quartararo and Pedro Acosta are clearly better. I think Pecco Bagnaia, I think probably Pecco Bagnaia is slightly better, but I mean, like, Alex Marquez is right on a par with Bagnaia. He's doing, what Bagnaia was doing on the same bike last year, what Jorge Martin was doing on the same bike last year. He has been just superb, and he's made a massive step this year as well, which has been most impressive. I also think that the Sunday race is much more indicative of his form than the sprint race, precisely because he was worried about trying to. I mean, like, he knew that he would eventually win the second in the championship, but he had more to lose than to gain, because all it takes is a small mistake, snap his wrist, whatever, and that's it, game over. All of a sudden, he sort of sat at home watching the TV, hoping that nobody catches him. So, yeah, he did say he was riding very, very wooden. I think we also saw this a little bit in Moto2. I don't know what you think, Neil, but Manu Gonzalez crashing out while he was ahead of Moreira, while Moreira was leading. It's exactly the same sort of thing. It's just those kind of nerves. I remember Danny Kent's Moto3 championship, where he had a massive lead and he kept on finding ways to throw it away. And in the end, it came down to a very mediocre result at Valencia, but it was how he wrapped it up. I think we underestimate how much nerves plays a role in these things.
Well, let's move on to the former world champion then. Another kind of schizophrenic weekend. Can we use that word in the nicest possible way? He won the sprint on Saturday. He looked a little bit back to being the old Pecco Bagnaia, but now that's 4 DNFs from the last 5 GPs. He's only got 1 podium finish in 9. Of course, he had the smoking issue when he actually won that GP, took that trophy in Japan. He rode without his rear ride height device on Saturday during the sprint win, which is even more mystifying. But then he explained it a little bit today in his media debrief by saying that, the low grip conditions here at Sepang meant that the bike was moving around. And even he was surprised to learn that it was quite manageable and he could set fast lap times with those kind of conditions. How do we explain these, Neil? I mean, what are the good results down to? I mean, he seemed to indicate earlier in the weekend that the team were actually working and finding little improvements, which had begun, oddly enough, in the race at Phillip Island before he crashed out.
I mean, it's the $1 million question, isn't it? And it seems to be something which is consuming everyone that's working in MotoGP at the moment. With the kind of title race settled back in Japan, this has kind of taken on a greater kind of significance, I feel. I can't help but think that part of it is just down to the tracks that we've gone to. I mean, Japan, where we had fairly settled conditions, a brilliant track for Pecco in the past. Everything came together, and he obviously did what he did there. Then we went to Mandalika, where we had kind of a different rear tire, dirty track, weird conditions, and he was completely thrown off. And it seems like everything is just like exaggerated in Pecco Bagnaia's world at the moment. The same could be said of Phillip Island. And then we come here, the first day is pretty bad. Second day is sensational. And then, today it was going to be an okay day. He kind of indicated that maybe he could have had something to fight with Alex at the end of the race, although I really don't think that was looking likely. But there were signs that, he was returning back to his best on Saturday. I mean, he did the sprint without the lever, which activated his ride height device working, and somehow was still able to completely dominate that contest, despite not being able to, activate his ride height device, which seems kind of almost barely believable how much he used that at a track like this. It's a pickle, but I kind of feel that, there was none of that sort of flailing around that you saw on the previous 2 weekends. And this has obviously been a great track for Pecco in years gone by. It was a markedly improved weekend, even if the final result doesn't necessarily show it.
It's a pickle, Pecco. Shame about the puncher. Perfect otherwise. Goodness, I'll stop there. We had a question from Graham Norton, Dave. It could be that Graham Norton. In some ways, was this a better weekend for Pecco than Japan? Because he seemed to be able to ride around the problems.
A really good question, and I think he's spot on. I think one of the worst things, I wrote about this on Saturday, the worst things that can happen to an engineer is when things work and they work, and you have no idea why they work. What happened at Motegi was, Pecco turned up, the bike felt great, he rode it, and they don't know what they did to explain why that was. I do think it's much, much better because it wasn't, this wasn't a Motegi weekend. This was, he said, I still don't have the feeling. I don't have the feeling that I had sort of last year. But they made a step in Phillip Island, especially on Sunday during the race. They made some steps during the weekends to help. And he kept on feeling better and better. And so they found some kind of some kind of a direction. He did say, very honestly, he said, look, I'm not a good adapter to things that I like. I can't ride around problems, which is basically what we've been saying for a long time. When everything is in place, he's unbeatable, absolutely unbeatable. But if it's not, just as it is, he has a certain amount of margin, which is the difference between the occasional win and winning a couple of championships. But he couldn't really sort of make it. And to explain why he was still fast without the ride high device, he was saying, what happens here, because of the way that the track is, because of the grip, you actually set the rear shock up to be quite soft. And because it's quite soft, the rear tends to drop a little bit more anyway. You're sort of you're gently squeezing the rear tire into the asphalt, and that allows you to accelerate hard. So if you like, you've got sort of like about a third or a quarter of a ride height device just through the natural way of using the ride height device. And when the ride height device is there, because you're using up a lot of travel, it's extra travel, so it's not actually shock travel, but you are actually putting the shock in a different place, and you're changing the ratio slightly of the leverage, so of the linkage, so it all feels a little bit different. So in the end, it came out because he could find traction, because they had the rear shock set up quite softly.
Apologies to any listeners or viewers who can hear some banging and clanging in the background, but the Dorna logistics staff are busy taking down the TV broadcaster set, so it does feel a little bit like the building is falling down around our ears. If you have anything banging and clanging on your motorcycle, then head to rental.com, because there's some fantastic accessories there: bars, grips, chain wheels, chains. Go and have a look at rental.com. For your street bike. If you've got a particular model, of course you have, then go to the Fit My Bike option. They have a series of drop-down menus, and you'll be able to find exactly the accessory that you want for the bike that you have. So thanks to rental.com for helping out with the Paddock Pass podcast. Also on the podium for the fourth time this season here in Sepang, one more trophy, and he'll equal his haul, I think, from 2024. Pedro Acosta, and 3 KTMs in the top 10 overall, with a remarkable comeback from Enea Bastianini. We'll mention him later, as well as Brad Binder from 18th and 19th on the grid respectively. Wow, the KTMs have struggled in these overseas races, but today they found a way to maximize tire life on maybe one of the hardest stages for it. Impressive stuff. Who wants to sort of take this one on? Any thoughts?
It was twofold. It was two things. They sat down. I think Paul Espargaro was saying, we sat down on Saturday night after the sprint and said, we have to figure out how to do this. Looked at the tire wear. They realized that the soft was going to be the tire, and they had to manage it. The riders worked on how they can adjust their riding, which again is sort of bonkers, really, because you're having to accelerate as smoothly as possible while trying to go as fast as possible, which is almost counterintuitive. They changed the electronics a little bit. It was hard to interpret what Pedro Acosta was saying in the press conference, but it sounded like he told his engineers, just give me the throttle and I'll sort it out. And it was very, very impressive, because you were watching him expecting his rear tire to just run out at some point, but he stuck with Pecco for more than for longer than he stuck with him during the sprint race. So they really did fix something, and it wasn't until lap 12 that Pecco's rear tire went. So yeah, they did a really, really good job. I don't think it's a permanent solution. This was a workaround. They found a workaround, and Acosta was able to use that. I think they had 3 KTM's in the top 10. Pol Espargaro was gutted that he crashed because he felt that he could have been in the top 10 as well. So yeah, just a really, really good weekend for them.
Yeah, and a really good performance again from Pedro Acosta. I did have the impression through the weekend that this was a kind of winner bin it, because he did crash 3 times through Friday and Saturday, 1 in FP1, 1 in practice, 1 in Q2, I believe. And could make the argument that it was another sort of Q2 session in which he maybe crashed when the heat was on. We saw that in Hungary earlier this year, but he still managed to qualify in the second row. He was pretty downbeat on Saturday. He was saying, after about 7 laps, he knew he was in big trouble. And he said he was pretty worried for the longer race today, but just how he was able to manage it up behind the 2 Ducatis and how he was kind of taking the fight to Bagnaia. And okay, Bagnaia obviously had his puncture starting, I think, 5 laps before he eventually retired. But Acosta wasn't being dropped by Alex Marquez for much of the race. I thought it was just like another really, really mature kind of performance from him. He said, to his mechanics, like, just, it can't be any worse than yesterday. So please just help me out with something that's maybe a bit risky and a bit out of the box. He was able to kind of do the rest. And it's quite interesting what Pol Espargaro was saying on Saturday, when asked about, the job that Pedro was doing. And he said the whole team around Pedro feels like a kind of obligation towards providing him with something that he can win with. There's almost a feeling of guilt, according to Pol Espargaro, that they are not giving Pedro the tools to basically win a MotoGP at the moment. And he said if he was on another manufacturer or with 1 or 2 other machines, there's no question he would have won multiple races by now. But at the moment, he's kind of head and shoulders above the rest of the KTM guys. And I think he said at the start of the weekend, he's talked about kind of trying to change his approach many times in recent months, compared to the start of the season. But the start of this weekend, he was just saying, like, okay, we might not be able to fight for victories, but there is still so much to be learned and gleaned from this kind of experience where I'm able to learn how to ride smoothly. I'm able to learn how to ride more consistently. I thought he did God's work, really, at the end of that race. To be as high as he did was working minor miracles. And frankly, I don't think there's anyone riding as well as Acosta in MotoGP right.
Yeah, it's a great shout. I think we also have to give credit to the way that KTM worked it out, because it not only was Pedro making the difference. He was only 2.5 seconds away from Alex Marquez at the end. But as we said, Brad Binder and also Nea Bastianini looking far more competitive when it came to the crunch than they had throughout the rest of the weekend. KTM, where they faced sort of difficulties, they kind of systematically worked through it. So I think you've got to give props where it's due. Another manufacturer also working through their issues, Honda. Dave, Joan Mir popping up on the podium again in P3. Okay, we can attribute some of the result down to, Bagnaia's puncture. But Mir, as I mentioned in my moment at the top of the show, just looking on it, looking feisty. And, he wasn't affected by the same sort of grip issues. Again, just to explain to listeners or viewers of this, Johann Zarco was lamenting, how tyre drop just left him powerless for the last 4 laps of the Grand Prix. And I said to him, I asked him rather, what does that feel like? And he just said, just a complete inability, like to paraphrase, to turn the motorcycle. You can get all your braking done normally into the corners, but as soon as you start to turn, you lose your speed. You can't prevent people overtaking you. You lose the exit, and you're just, you're a sitting duck, basically. That's why Zarco lost those positions. I went down to, I think, 12th. But, it didn't seem to affect the KTMs as they moved up the order, and the likes of like Ayagura. But, Honda getting the job done.
Honda looked really good, and Joan Mir looked really good. We were sort of like in the group chat were asking when are we going to see him fall off, Joan Mir, but he didn't. He stayed on board. He did look fantastic. It was a genuine joy to watch him riding like that, Luca Marini has been saying all weekend, look, we've made really, really big steps. The bike still turns. They still have a few sort of issues, but they can brake deep. They can turn the bike. They still need some help in turning. But apart from that, the bike is pretty good. The last engine update from a few races ago has a bit more power. They need another step to really make a massive step towards being really competitive. But yeah, nothing to add. Honda have really, really gone about this the right way, and they're I think next year is going to be really interesting. It looks like they are going to be fighting for podiums next year,
just like they are this year, I guess you could say, Dave.
No, but I mean, like, it feels like this. I mean, Joan Mir earned the podium in Motegi. This one he inherited. He got a little bit lucky, but I mean, here now they're starting the race knowing that they can fight for top fives. I think next year they will start the race thinking we can fight for a podium. Maybe we can, like now they're looking into, the position is sort of, fourth or fifth, and they are looking into a podium. Next year, I think their position is going to be fourth, third, and then occasionally they'll look into a win. And then if it keeps on like that, then you have to say, this is some bike, hats off to what HRC have done.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, a superb weekend from Mir. The sights that he was pulling, as Adam said earlier in the show, during the sprint was quite remarkable. You were wondering how he was managing to stay on it before he eventually crashed, just because he was so out of shape steering into the turn. It seemed to be taking narrower lines than everyone else. He said that was just down to the kind of feeling with the front and the confidence that he had. On Friday, I think it was as early as Friday, he said, normally I start these debriefs with it was a pretty tough day, but today it was like, no, immediately I felt comfortable.
It was an easy day.
And it was an easy day, yeah. We haven't heard Joan Mir say that very, very often in his time as a Honda MotoGP rider. And unlike Motegi, where you could attribute much of his success there to starting on the front row, a brilliant qualifying and then starting on the front row. I mean, he started seventh here, and okay, he got a good start, but he still had to really fight through, quite a few riders like the likes of, I think, Fermin Aldeguer, Franco Morbidelli, Fabio Quartararo early on. Okay, Bagnaia was obviously having issues with his tyre, but, there was a point where he was kind of closing in on that 5 per second with Acosta and Bagnaia in the closing laps, and it looked as though the gap was hovering around 2 seconds, and it was down to 1.5. So, yeah, I think although he got slightly fortuitous, I still feel that he kind of earned this coming through from 7th on the grid. And just to look at Honda's recent progress, I mean, to put into perspective the fantastic work they did over the summer break, obviously bringing that updated chassis, swing arm, electronics updates as well. I mean, the top Honda was 6th in Austria, 5th in Hungary, 8th in Barcelona, which maybe wasn't brilliant, but then 7th in Misano, when it probably could have been 5th or 6th with a better start for Marini. 3rd in Japan, 5th in Indonesia, 6th in Phillip Island, and 3rd again in Sepang here. I mean, these are very consistent results now in top 8 every weekend, and on a good weekend, top 3. It's just great to see Mir looking so strong again, because I think Matt Bird said during the sprint on Saturday, 44 DNFs that he's had as a Honda rider since he joined in 2023. I mean, that is just absolutely absurd, and be so easy to just become so completely psychologically destroyed with that inconsistency and the sheer lack of positivity. Nothing to really grab hold of in 2023 and 2024. But to be fair to Mir, when you put the bike underneath him, he's shown I can overcome this. And even the disappointment of yesterday, that must have been something quite strong. We saw Alberto Puig, the team manager, looking very crestfallen on the team on the pit wall. But yeah, he did pretty well to come back today.
Honda are doing so well that they are now need just 19 points to move up from Category D to Category C in concessions, which would mean that next year they would not have free engines, they'd have fewer test tires, and more importantly, they wouldn't be able to test with their riders. Now, someone from inside Honda was saying that some of the mechanics had been discussing this, and they were really looking forward, really hoping that Honda would make it out of Category D, because it meant they they would have so many fewer private tests to go to. It would be left to the test team. But that in itself is both an achievement and a sign that the system is really, really working well.
That kind of curtailing of concessions maybe affected KTM a little bit, Dave, because they were making superb process in the Premier class, and then they reached that performance level, and then it kind of changed a little bit. So it's not insignificant, and it's a great point to make as well. 7 days ago, if you wanted a result of Phillip Island, you had to be on an Aprilia. It's a little bit of a different scenario here in Sepang. Iagura making his way late in the race, some decent tyre preservation. He said he needed to be more aggressive on Saturday. It didn't really seem to be that way. I just being very typically systematic with his performance, rising up to, I think it was just ahead of Marco Bezzecchi. So he was actually the first Aprilia home. And, Bezzecchi finishing in 11th, that's his worst race result since the French GP at Le Mans, where he registered a 14th place. We had a question in from TV Room Raccoon that says, typical Aprilia flyaway shit show?
No.
Is that a bit harsh, perhaps?
Yeah,
yes.
that is harsh, because the typical Aprilia flyaway shit show is where there's a technical problem, everything goes wrong, and the bike breaks down. The bike is not breaking down. It's just that they couldn't find a setup.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think this is as bad as it looks. I think, again, like for many riders, the weekend was really conditioned on Friday when a strange rain shower affected the end of practice and kind of gave the final standings on that day a bit of an upside down complexion. I mean, you had the likes of Jack Miller in third, Alex Rins was up there as well, even though he didn't have a good rhythm or a good pace. And some of the more established names like Marco Bezzecchi were out. He had a really good comeback in the sprint. And it didn't go brilliantly well today. He was left to rue. I think he was one of the few riders to choose the medium front tire as opposed to the soft, which the race winner was on. He felt that maybe hindered him somewhat. But if you look at the final standings, I mean, Bezzecchi was just over 1 second back of 8th. Had he maybe qualified a little bit better, he felt he had the speed to be there in 5th, fighting with Quartararo, maybe in 6th with Di Gianantonio. As Dave said, there were no catastrophic mechanical meltdowns. The bike isn't overheating like it was in previous Tours of Asia in these really hot, humid conditions like we saw. This was backed up in, the performances in Indonesia and here today. Bezzecchi was saying that they've finally managed to get that under control. And this has just always been a crap track for Aprilia. The highest result they've ever scored here was a 7th place, 2016 with Alvaro Bautista and with Maverick Vinales last year. And I think you have to look at the flyaways as a whole, and 2 of them, the Aprilia was absolutely the bike to be on and the bike to beat. One of them, Motegi, probably had podium potential had he not been taken out in the sprint by his teammate. And then today, it wasn't brilliant, but it was still top 6, top 7 potential if everything had played out in a kind of normal fashion. So I think this has been a really, really good stage of the season for Aprilia, and it shows that they've made massive progress from the likes of 22, 23, 24, when everything just kind of seemed to fall apart when we went across to Asia.
It's easy to be glib and cynical about Raul Fernandez after an unexpected victory in Australia last weekend, but Fernandez held his hand up and said he made a mistake in choosing the medium rear. That was more like his selection rather than the team's. That was the impression he gave in his explanation in the media debrief. But Raul was also quite stoic, saying it's also a fantastic sort of facet of MotoGP at the moment that there are different riders and different brands excelling on different weekends. It just gives it a little bit more of an unpredictable edge, even if it is sort of quite confusing in a way. But yes, another thing that's quite confusing, guys, is the Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League. Well, certainly to me anyway. I was on Team Pecco this weekend. I slotted him in there ahead of Marquez, finally changed him out, and I also boosted him. So I was very deflated along with his rear tyre after the events of the race today. How's the league getting on? Who's winning?
Yeah, you were extremely lucky. You actually had a pretty good weekend, Adam. All things considered, despite Pecco crashing out. We have a new leader for our fantasy team. Atlas 19 takes over from the tie for second place, Pussy Racing and Lyle. In terms of us, Steve is still leading, but he lost 51 places. Neil lost 5 places, but he did get a little bit closer. So Steve is 206th, Neil is 315th. I cracked the top 1,000, so that's good. 976. I moved up 26 places, and you moved up 95 places, Adam. So yeah, good work. You had you finally had a good weekend, but exactly like Pecco Bagnaia, whenever you have a good weekend, something goes horribly wrong to mess it up.
Yeah, just full empathy. That's all it's about. So yeah, okay, interesting developments. We are the Moto 2 of the MotoGP podcasting world. It has to be said. So we're going right down to the wire. Neil, were any clever clogs who made the correct race predictions this weekend?
Yeah, just very briefly, I'm now 33 points back of Steve English when it was a much bigger margin about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So Steve is very much the Manu Gonzalez looking over his shoulder, and I'm Diogo Moreira herring into sight. And Steve is twitching nervously back in Ireland. I can just tell. Yeah, there weren't a great deal. Well, there was no one that actually correctly predicted the sprint and race winner, but the Raccoon correctly predicted Pecco to win the sprint. Eric Harvey, 47, and Adam Cole correctly predicted Alex to win on Sunday. One of the questions we asked on our predictions post was there was perhaps a sense of fatigue, I feel. I mean, no one loves MotoGP more than our patron followers. I think that is a very fair point to say, but I sensed even on Thursday among them there was a distinct lack of enthusiasm for this weekend, and I asked which point in the weekend would you be reminded of your love for MotoGP, and Adam Cole said the moment that Fermin stacked his bike at the very back of the Corsini garage after he rode through the paddock at the end of Q1, which was a pretty good answer, and certainly one of the more standout images of the weekend. We also asked our patrons how long into the show it would take to hear Dave sigh and say 22 races, man, before looking vacantly off and into the distance. Raccoon said it would be after he complains about the early race time, but before he complains about the attendance figure. And Graham Norton predicted that it would be the first words that Dave said, which actually was incorrect because I haven't heard you say it once in this show yet, Dave.
No, I haven't. I was things happen and things change, and we live and we grow.
We learn and we grow.
This is where we're transitioning into like a video podcast because Dave's face says it all. No words are necessary. So apologies to people listening to this on audio. But yes, things are looking good in the fantasy league and some of our prediction patrons as well. Getting the hang of this MotoGP lark at round 20 of 22. Interesting that we would have been done in recent seasons past, 20 Grand Prix, but still 2 more to go and another back-to-back at that in Portugal and Valencia. Let's move on to the section of the show that is our hire and fire. Neil, who is your employable pick?
My employable pick was Pedro Acosta. I mean, I feel we have... I've waxed lyrical about Pedro a lot recently, but I thought his ride today was absolutely sensational. To come away from this weekend, a track when tyre conservation was a big deal with 2 podium finishes, second in the feature race, I think was worthy of praise. And we've already spoken about him. And I'd also like to shoehorn in a quick shout out to Scott Ogden, Moto3 rider who is riding for the CIP KTM squad, teammate to Noah Dettwiler. And Scott obviously went out and raced not long after the incident, which involved Noah, obviously on the siding lap. And the team were understandably very, very upset. Scott was, I think, really affected by what had happened. I think we saw a shot of him on the grid just before the race started. He looked very, very nervous, understandably. Trying to get himself into the zone, I think, was no easy thing. He actually had a brilliant ride, came through to finish in 8th, just less than 5 seconds off the victor, and caught up with them briefly afterwards, and he said, I just wanted to give the team something to shout about, make some people in the team happy, because obviously emotions were very high, and I thought that was a remarkable performance for Scott considering everything that's happened. So fair play to him.
Good call, Neil. My hire, sorry, Dave, just before you, I'm going to jump in ahead of you. I'm going to hire the Sunday version of Enea Bastianini because the Friday version is sackable 100%. The Saturday one is kind of falling in the middle somewhere, but the Sunday one, I think by his own admission, is pretty much on it. And to come away, with that sort of top 7 finish from starting 19th. I mean, in a way, I can understand his frustration when he sits down with us and in his kind of broken English, he kind of smiles, but also expresses his utter frustration with this situation. I think on Friday he was barely muting his anger as he said, every Grand Prix is the same story. It's like I get on a new bike, I have to reset, I have to discover it, and then by Sunday I can actually ride it. So I mean, I know Bastianini has had changes in the background with his crew chief. There's been some turbulence there. But, if we can kind of start the GPs with a Sunday Bastia, then it's going to be, a really interesting scenario. I think, Pedro Acosta's not going to have the spotlight, the orange spotlight, all to himself. So that's my nomination. Who's your pick, Dave?
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see if they only counted the last 15 laps instead of all 20. Bastianini would be much better. My pick is Alex Marquez because he has been so good. He's been so consistent. He deserves second in the championship. He had the Sunday Alex Marquez was the Alex Marquez that we've seen all week, all season, really. And just hats off to him. He's made such a big step, a much bigger step than I thought he was capable of. And he's just a very, very complete rider at the moment.
For our firing category, I want to kind of take an alternative view and say Jake Dixon. If I was the boss of the HRC team in Superbike, I'd fire him straight away and say, no, stay another year in Moto2, you. He's obviously quick enough to be able to win GPs, and it's again a sort of sad indictment of the state of British Grand Prix racing that a rider who, by his own admission, says he's coming into his peak. He started his career very late. Is still very competitive on a very demanding track, and Dixon looked in form all weekend long. So that's a slightly strange one. I also sort of want to mention Raul Fernandez, and it seems very cruel to put him in the fire category, but I want to do it simply because he had the nicest Grand Prix racing livery on the grid together with Ayagura, and he dropped it into the gravel. So it's a sin almost to scrape all that nice golf bodywork. But,
it's hard.
There we go.
One week on from singing his praises, and there you are tearing him apart.
No, I know. Superficial. Dave, who was your fire?
My fire is Yamaha's V4 projects, because if there's one thing that we learned...
Harsh.
Not harsh
That's
at all.
harsh.
Not harsh enough. Not harsh.
They've
No.
come in. No, they've come in saying it's all very beginner, it's baby steps.
Yes, and they're going to race it next year, and it's going to be absolutely terrible because they have so much work to do. They are so far behind. I wrote about this on Friday. A V4 is so fundamentally different to an inline four. It takes so much time. I think Augusto Fernandez today was saying, look, we've still got, we took the inline four frame and sort of adapted it so that the V4 engine would fit into it. And everything is in the wrong place. They really need to change that. They've got so much data that they need. They come to, every different track, they're having to change the thing by centimeters. They're having to move it up and down and longer, shorter, higher, changing weight distribution. They don't know what they're doing yet. That's completely understandable because that's what you do when you make such an enormous change. But they are in real trouble because this bike is not going to be ready for next year. It's not going to be competitive for next year. And, Fabio Quartararo will have signed to replace Pecco Bagnaia in the factory Ducati team for 2027 before we get to the Buriram race.
Well, that's us out of getting any content with Yamaha for the Paddock Pass podcast for a while, certainly with the V4. Neil, who's your choice to leave out in the 35-degree Malaysian sun and shrivel up?
My choice is Manny Gonzalez, who had a spectacular fall from grace in the Moto2 race at the end of the day. I've been standing up for Manu in recent weeks and thinking that maybe one or two tracks that we've been at haven't quite suited him, and we're going to see the real Manu here this weekend. And I loved what he did on Saturday during qualifying when himself and chief protagonist Diogo Moreira found themselves on track. Moreira passed him when they were starting their, I think, first flying laps of the session going into turn number 1. And Gonzalez just said, no, you don't, mate, and barged him offline in turn 2, I think it was. And they both pitted, and Manu went on to qualify in 7th place. Morera seemed to really get frazzled by what happened, and was 16th on the grid. And you thought, okay, well, there's a tick in Manu's sort of tally box. But then today, it just was not good. I mean, it wasn't a terrible race from Gonzalez, but he really seemed to get a little bit flustered when Morera got just behind him. I think Gonzalez was in 5th position. Morera had come through with another brilliant ride back through the field, kind of Saxon Ring-esque, and he was within a second of Gonzalez and was closing in on him. And Gonzalez has been pretty weak in that final turn all weekend. He had one massive front end save on the Friday, and tucked the front, and down he went. And for the first time in ages, maybe the first time all season, I need to go back and check this, he has relinquished the championship lead. And for the first time in his career, Diogo Moreira has taken the championship lead. So this feels like a very significant kind of tonal shift in the Moto2 power play this year. And Gonzalez was 60 points ahead of Moreira going into the summer break. Now finds himself 9 points in the arrears. I mean, that is a massive, massive reverse in 8 races.
I think, again, we talked about this with Alex Marquez. You really underestimate just how much pressure there is. And it is so much easier to chase than it is to lead. When you're chasing when you're chasing someone who's leading, you've got nothing to lose. Because if you fail, then, at least you tried. If you're leading, every lap is, I make sure I mustn't make a mistake. I mustn't make a mistake. Mustn't make a mistake.
Grades for the Grand Prix. I'm going to give a generous 8. I was a little bit too harsh, I think, on Phillip Island. But as I thought, while Phillip Island was as ever spectacular for the speed, here in Sepang we had a Grand Prix that was engaging for the strategy involved. There were little kind of battles and action. There were riders pushing through right at the end, unexpected things happening. And of course, if we kind of take away the sad episode that started the day, then I think we had some pretty entertaining stuff all the way through, and just a general feeling of upheaval and chaos and unpredictable scenes. And there was 190,000 people here for the weekend. Dave, time for your eye roll. I'll just cue you up right there. And I was a bit concerned on Saturday because it didn't look like there was too many fans here in the main grandstand along the straight, but it was suitably full and very sort of, there were audible cheers as well from, here's where I mispronounce names, Hakim Danish in Moto3, a local rider making his Danish. Oh, it was close. Making a pretty decent turn, getting into the top 10 before his bike expired. So, it was something for the local partisans to cheer. So, an 8 for me. Neil, what was your score?
I'm going to give it a 6. I mean, there was it wasn't vintage racing, I don't think, in MotoGP, but it rarely is at Sepang. But it was cool to see KTM on the podium, Honda on the podium. The travails of Pecco Bagnaia never ceases to entertain, even if it has been a very unpredictable time for him. And, Moto2, lots of drama. But I think everything just takes a bit of a backseat when you have an incident like you did at the start of Moto3. You tend to focus on the bigger things in life rather than something as trivial as racing. And, shout out to Franco Morbidelli, who was stressing this in his debrief, and I was trying to ask him 1 or 2 things about his race, and he was just kind of looking at me like, well, what are you doing asking me about that when that's happened? He was stressing the fact that we still hadn't at the time had any official updates on the kind of the state of either rider. And I had to apologize and say, sorry for
he told you off again, Neil. He told you off again.
But this time he was well within his rights too, and I respected him for it. So I think that's kind of the feeling that I have at the moment. So it's at this stage you're crossing your fingers, and that's never a nice feeling to have leaving a Grand Prix.
Dave, just quickly, what are you writing on the chalkboard?
For some of the same reasons, a 4. The racing was not particularly entertaining. The season is dragging on too long. I need something a lot more interesting to keep my interest. There were lots of interesting stories. Also, shout out to Pecco Bagnaia because he started his he was asked a question in the first was, let's talk about Moto3. I think that is really, really important. it's just yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I'm going to enjoy this Grand Prix a lot more later on in the week when I actually sit down and think about it rather than dragging myself through yet another weekend.
So we almost got through the podcast, Neil, of Dave not complaining about the length of the race calendar. Almost
54 minutes,
there.
50 more minutes, Mark. Anyone who guessed 54 minutes is correct.
Well, at least
He just
there
couldn't
was
let it
still one.
slide, could he?
I could not let it go.
It was like the weather last weekend.
Yeah. Or the timing, the scheduling. We're going to let this podcast go. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We will be back with a show previewing the final double, as we mentioned, the 2025 season. Send us any comments, feedback, reviews. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to join us for more as we go into the winter period of MotoGP via YouTube. And in the meantime, check out our Patreon page and join us again soon.